Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Streaming Alchemy Show. I'm John Mahoney, and on today's show, we're going to explore how to automate a shopping based production, something where you want to put multiple items up for sale or for auction or something similar to that, and want to try to automate as much of it as you can, especially because it's so repetitive. So, before we get into that, I want to remind everybody that we'd love to have you join us on the show. So if you'd like to call in, the link is in the show notes, and you can just type it in right here on the screen. But we are always grateful for any type of engagement we get. So if you want to just share comments, thoughts, ask questions, typing, that would be great too. So let's get started. So what I wanted to cover was really the entire process behind managing an auction style or sales style production. And if you think about it, home shopping channels have been around for a long time, and they're out on late night TV all the time, and they have a pretty standard format. So we're going to try to mirror some of that here. So what I'm going to show is we're going to do a sale of multiple items, and I'm going to place the items on a table, and the entire process then that will be triggered by that action. And we're going to do this now for several items. So let me actually demo this right here so we have a good, clear picture of what we want to do. So I have a set of items here that I will pretend to sell. And each one of these is something to do with streaming and video production. So if I said I have this Stream Deck XL that I wanted to sell, the automation will let me place this on the table. And now it will pop up right next to me a description, switch to the camera that has it sort of zoomed in so you get a nice clear product shot. And I can stand here and talk as long as I want about anything that's going on here, and all the great features of the product. And when we're done and I've finished that, I can just pull the product away and it will switch back to the main camera. But not only that, what this will queue up now is what we're going to do for our next item for sale, which would be this Spark Pro. And now when I put that down, again, the sidebar comes up and it brings the close-up shot of the item for sale. And so we can do this really for as many items as we want. So this great PTZ Optics 20x camera, put that there. And again, the same thing. So what I'd like to do now that we've seen this is go over how we actually ended up putting this all together. And the key for doing this is something on the TriCaster called HotSpots. So what a hotspot is, essentially, is it's an area of the screen that's covered by some sort of chroma key. So it needs to be something where that background is removed, that when I move an item into that area, it triggers a macro. And when I pull an item out of that area, it triggers another macro. So let me show you this is a capture from the TriCaster screen. What we've basically done here in this area of the table over to the right where I was placing the boxes is I have defined a little hotspot. And this hotspot now, that's why if you were thinking that the green tabletop was a decorating choice, think again. That was so we could do this demo with the chroma key. But, the thing to keep in mind when you're thinking of this as a tool is that this shot here, where I was doing the chroma key, doesn't have to be a great quality key. It simply needs to be a complete key of the area you want covered. And what you'll see, let me just show here, when I place an item into that area, you see the box turns solid, and that's the trigger. So that's what sets off the macros and all the other things that happen when we place an item up on the podium that we want to do a sale around. So probably the next step is let's jump into the TriCaster interface and let me show you a bit. So let me pull this up here and turn this on so I can sort of tear control away from everybody over here. So here is the UI of the TriCaster we have set up here. So one of the things you'll notice over here, if you look, is we have the camera, which is recording our hotspot. Now, the interesting thing here is that this camera here, which I have in preview, is the exact same as this camera here. Let me see. ETZ center. Okay. Yeah, so what I'm basically doing is I'm using one camera that I would use for a shot, and this camera can either be keyed out and used for doing the hotspots, or it can be a full complete shot, and that would be something that we can use for a regular production. So we can, in this case, we're using one camera, one stream NDI, and the other stream SDI to sort of handle this. But that's only the first part. What you really have to do is you have to set everything up that goes around this. So let me go over here, and I'm going to configure the hotspots. And the first thing you do, let me actually jump back here, is you actually have to do the keying. So we go and we set up the key and we chroma keyed everything that was over here in this area out so that it was now sort of transparent to the lens of the camera. Then under the automation tab, what we do is we position. If you actually, let me turn this on for a second because I don't want to. If you see over here in the screen, this is the hotspot area that we have that when I place an item in, it will come on. So we don't toggle things through. I just wanted you to see that. Now, I had the ability in here to take and move that hotspot around. So, I can tweak it where I want it and get that to happen. I can also make it bigger or smaller so you can zoom in. But where all the magic happens, let me just turn it off, is we actually set up two macros. And the macros are for what do you want to do when it activates, where I actually move something into that little square that we had, that red square on the tabletop. And the second one is what happens when we pull something out of it. And that's really how we ended up driving all this. We had those two options. And so we set up two macros. One was auctions panel to show, and the other is auction panel to hide. So let me jump in now and go back to the macros. So in the TriCaster, go over to macros and configure macros. And so, excuse me. So if you look here, what I have for this is I have a reset, which basically is if I wanted to start the production off, that would reset everything back to our start point. And then I have a macro for on and off. So let's jump over here and take a look at what happens for, oh, sorry, I'm in the wrong ones over here. Sorry. Let me go over here. Yes. Oh, okay. The auction panel. Sorry, I was showing you the wrong ones here. So let's start with what we want to do when we jump into show. So what we're doing first is where, if you remember, we opened up that side panel. So you saw the probably a third of the screen was covered by all the product information. And that's exactly what we're doing here. That's telling us take our main downstream key on, the input and use that for buffer 6. And so we turned on buffer 6 and put that on the side of the screen. And so that was the first thing we did. Then I turned around and we made sure that we turned it off and then faded it on. And then we just turned around and said, okay. And now that when we've done that, so that side panel is up. Then we said switch to input 3. Now, input 3 was that close-up shot of the product, and it is going to just sit there. So this gives me, that's why I had the time to basically go in and talk about the product while it was sitting there. So there was no issue with just letting it, run, because the first on activation macro was actually completed. So the next macro, though, is what would happen when something goes away. So if I click edit here, we selected the uh, buffer 6, and we said as the input on downstream key, number 2, and then we said set it to 0, which basically shuts it off. So it turns that buffer off, and then we wait 60 seconds. So we keep the camera on the product shot for, 60 frames. So we keep the camera on the product shot for, about 2 seconds. And then we go in and switch back to input 1, which is the main camera we're looking at right here. So that is the entire automation process that's happening. When the trigger gets broken, we display the side panel. And when we remove the item from that, we remove the side panel and go back to the main camera. But you'll notice there's another little macro down here. And so this is the way we actually work with the data piece of running the auction. So how did we know what to put up when we put the box down to show an item? And so what we've done here is we're actually executing a batch file that's just sitting in the watch folder that will go and copy from a directory for the next item all of the data into the TriCaster watch folder. So it has all that information and the images available for the next item that we put up. So we're basically, for this, building what in computer parlance would be called a linked list. I have the first item, and at the end of that item is a link to the next item we're going to show. The link being a bat file that copies everything to display that next item. So that's basically how that entire automation process happens when we're running through this part of the show. So let me get out of here. And then the last thing that I will show is, let's just take a look at what we did with the buffer here. So if I go in here and pull this open, what you'll notice if I click in here is, again, we have all of the data link values associated with this. So this lists the item. This here is a brief description. This here is a long description. So these are all set up now in a template. And we could put as much information in here as we'd like. So I could go and do anything where if I wanted to have bullet points, that was something we actually also had in the XML files. But this is how we actually took all this information in. So we have one of these then for each item that comes up in the auction. And the entire process is really very, very simple to run. So for some of the stuff that we did, we have an on and off button. So we can turn around and say, don't look at the hotspot now, or look at them. So when you want to start up a sale, you can turn on the hotspot and it will do that. And then if you have people like me who talks with their hands all the time, then you can sort of pull back and say, okay, we'll shut the hotspot off to make sure we don't trigger it accidentally. So there are lots of smaller things that you can do in the production. And all that stuff is pretty easy to handle around doing this for whatever would work for your particular requirements. So what I'm going to do is, let me jump out of the TriCaster and go out of here. And let me show you the XML file we have, just so we can sort of round this out. Richard, how are you? Thank you for joining us. So it's always good to have you. I'm always happy when you take the time to say hi. So what we have here in the XML file are something we've done before, and I'm doing this a lot more because I think it's getting comfortable with working with files of data will make your productions a lot simpler to manage. So again, this is just stuff that we've covered, but we have these XML set up, which lists an auction item here, and that's the block of text. This is an item we're doing for auction. And then it goes in and says, what's the price? What are the images? Because those images were all pulled in through data link as well. What's the name of the item, the brief description, a full description. And then we actually had some bullet points in here as well. So if we wanted to do another slide out on the other side that could come out with bullet points, or if we wanted to, in the macro, replace the detailed information, uh, with bullet points, we could certainly do that. So, Stephen, hi, welcome. Uh, so Stephen Hayward just asked if there are templated XMLs or these ones we wrote ourselves. So this is something that we just put together ourselves. It is really standard XML file format. So it starts with delineators on both sides. So you can come back and say what each item is, and it's all blocked under one total, this is the whole package of information about an item. And so that's exactly how we had this set up. So when we created those graphics, we could actually go in and do anything then to populate them. And we can create multiple instances of graphics, as I said, to do things that could be interesting, additional points that we want to raise about an item. So this is really, now I know this isn't, a particularly long show here, but I think the most important things are, the way you can use this automation. Uh, yeah, Richard just made a point that we're using Notepad++ for editing. If you don't know that, that's a great little free editing app. Uh, and let me just say, I think I may have closed it. Uh, no, I didn't. One of the great things about uh, Notepad++ is that it understands the structure, so you can actually set things up as blocks and open and close them, and it knows that if I add a start bracket, that I need the end brackets for it. So it has sort of the code editor feel when you go in. Uh, it's free and it's a great editing utility. So if anybody out there is looking for something to do these types of things, it definitely is something to look at. And as Steven says, it's he uses that for editing outside of the TriCaster, as well. And it is in a lot of different platforms. I know it's Windows. I believe it's in Linux as well. So a great little utility there. So what I want to end with, though, is a few thoughts about the way you can think about hotspots in general. Hotspots are very much just a trigger mechanism. It's a way to activate some type of action. Uh, so Josh just made the point. VI is another one. VI is probably more detailed from like the coder point of view, and it's been around a long time. So I remember VI from when I was in college, and we don't want to go back to when that was, but that was a while ago. But definitely another option for editing these types of files that have structure to them. But one of the things that you don't have to worry about because you're using hotspots for triggering actions is the resolution of the camera. So if you have some of these decent standard definition cameras that are laying around, these are perfect for them. You don't have to get fine edges. You don't have to get anything else. This is not a camera that people see. It's a camera that the system sees. So it gives you the ability now to leverage some of your older gear to do more automation style things. And the fact I did this and put things on a table and did all that stuff, that's just one use case for this. If you think about the broader context of this, This would allow an individual talent on set that's sort of performing or talking to trigger actions. So if you had, say, a stage where you wanted to have a camera so you knew when somebody was standing at a podium, uh, you could give one type of shot. But if they walked away from the podium because they wanted to make, you know, and we've all dealt with this where you sort of have one camera and you try to do the type of follow. You could actually have a wide shot set up and a focus shot and have a camera behind the speaker or above the speaker, sort of from the back, pointed at a square on the floor that you tape in. And when they walk away from that square, when they exit the square, you switch to one camera, which is a wide shot. And when they come back and go over to the podium again, you switch to another camera. So lots of these types of uses where you have motion and the motion that people make could actually become a guide for doing things that you want to do in the production. And you can also take it as that can just be an aid. So you could come and say, as soon as that person walks away from the podium, I switch to a live camera, but then the operator can go and get a better shot from another PTZ and maybe then pick them up and follow them. But it makes that transition cleaner, especially, and again, I keep coming back to the way a lot of people that are part of this community work is you're working solo often, or you have very, very limited resources available when you're running productions. So having something that can smooth out those types of transitions where in the past it would be the person just walked off and you'd have to go and sort of figure out what you wanted to do next. You have it now something that will let you do that easily and cleanly without you having to sort of jump in and be focused on everything. So what I want to do now, just sort of to end the show, is I want to go through the example that we ran in the beginning when we demoed everything, but I'll talk through what's going on in the back end as all this happened. So the first thing before we even put an item on is that Joe, our technical director, has pressed a button to reset all the data. So now we're back and ready to start the auction. So if you remember, we had that little red square that was keyed out. So what I'm doing now when I put this box in here is I've triggered the red square. And it's gone through, it's read all the data out of that XML file that we loaded when we initialized everything. And it has that information now populated on the side. This came up because we triggered the active macro. So when we said, okay, show the sidebar, this is what comes up. When I pull this away now, what it's doing now is it's executing the exit macro, which pulls back the camera, and it is also put the data set ready for the next item. So when I put that item in again, it's now doing the exact same process, but with the data that we copied into the watch folder. So all of this now is a very straightforward automated procedure for doing these types of things. And then when everything gets shut off, so now we can turn off the hotspot, you don't have to worry that if I'm over here now or put something out, that I'm going to trigger it. So very easy to work in your production side, all macro driven and a lot of automation. So the repetitive task, if you were doing this for 20 or 30 items, you have it pretty well templated and you don't have to worry about repeating all those steps and making sure everything happens. So I hope you found this useful. It was a lot of fun doing this show. These are one of those ones where you really like to see how it all plays out, and it was a lot of fun for us putting this together. For our next show, we're actually going to take a look at something that is incredibly popular in the worship space, and that's ProPresenter 7. We just reached out to the folks at that build ProPresenter, and they're very interested in working with us. They'd love to have somebody on, but we are getting to learn the product. And so what we wanted to make sure as we learned is share some of the things that we saw, which we thought could be interesting use cases that maybe you haven't, if you're using it in your church or outside. There's a lot of use cases outside for ProPresenter. That may be something that you could start to use with ProPresenter in your current production tools to streamline some of your production workflow. So until then, we will be doing our after show. So if you'd love to, we'd love to have you if you'd love to hang around. And we can talk about anything you want, anything we talked about in today's show, live streaming in general. That would be great. But if you can't make it for that, I want to say, we look forward to talking to you again next Friday, and have a great week until then. Take care, everybody. Bye. Hey, everyone. Welcome to the post show. So, as I said at the end of the show, this was actually a lot of fun to put the show together. Uh, automation is such a cool topic in general because it's something I think everybody struggles with. Oh, Richard, thank you. It's great having a community of people that you get to interact with every week, and that's a lot of fun for us. But so I think if you are not using automation more heavily and not using data more heavily in your productions, you end up with oh, Josh, that's an excellent point. Yeah, I mean, we have it as a macro button on an X keys over on the production station. But yeah, the X keys foot switches would be perfect for this. Totally agree. Definitely a nice way to trigger things without having to do a lot. And what I would probably do, because I know those keys actually come in colors, I would probably have a red and a green, because I know when I'm doing a lot of stuff, I'll forget whether I just turned it on or turned it off. So I would probably set up two macros, one on, one off, with two foot switches, and just say green is on, red is off. But yeah, I mean, it's Stephen. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Stephen, if you haven't been watching, the On Social show, definitely something you should. But Stephen is exactly what we're talking about here. He's a one man production uh, point. So everything that he needs to do, from switching guests, lower thirds, any types of graphics, computer screens, he's doing all that himself while engaging in the conversation. So beyond being sort of the one man production crew, he's actually one man talent and production crew, which adds just that much more stress. So anything you can do for that, that's always great. Uh, One of the things that I didn't mention, and we found this out the hard way. we This is one of those cases where we didn't really read closely what was being said on the screen. Hotspots on TriCaster, for some reason, do not work with NDI-HX. So we had everything set up, and we have a camera above us that gives sort of the overhead shot if we wanted to come down to the desk. Uh, and that's an NDI-HX. It's a PTZ Optics 20X box cam. So it's a great little compact camera. And we keep that over the desk if we want to do desk shots. We couldn't get things to work. We're like, I have the hotspot set up. What's going on? And then if when you're setting up the hotspots, there's a little eye information icon sort of sitting in the control panel. And when you click on that, the last note in that says, hotspots are not compatible with NDI-HX. So we're like, oh, so we ended up actually pulling an SDI cable. So we took this camera that we have here, and for the show, we have working NDI normally. So we pulled an SDI cable out of that and brought that back and used the SDI to trigger all the hotspots action. And then, we use the NDI for the normal shots we're doing here with the after show. But that was something that turned around and bit us, and I'm not sure why. I don't have a good technical reason for that, but definitely something that keep in mind because it had us going for a couple of hours. Where we were like, okay, I got to figure out if I have a plan B for for making this happen if it wasn't working. But so if anybody has any questions about what we did, and, any wanted to dig deeper into anything, sort of behind the scenes of how we put this together, more than happy to do that. Uh, One of the things, sort of a informational bit that I saw is that NewTek released a new version of their 7.1 software. And well, there are lots of small things that sort of affect everybody. One of the big things is that the mini 4K, mini UHD, they just call it the TriCaster Mini, but it's their new one that does UHD. Uh, that unit, when it shipped, didn't work with user-defined macros. And that was one that sort of boggled my mind because we talk about automation all the time, and you can't do automation without having these macros in there. So I think there was a lot of feedback from the TriCaster community that said, guys, you can't take this out. And they actually added it back in this new release. So now the mini 4K uh, supports macros. So that was a big deal because to me, yeah, Josh, agree. I cannot believe they shipped it without macros either. I think one of the things that makes the TriCaster sort of own that professional end is this macro automation capability. It does so many great things. So Stephen, so is there a way without sacrificing an input, since the Mini and 460 only have 4 inputs and no NDI? So you can come in any way that you want, but it does take an input. So there isn't any way to do this without that. But uh, there are lots of alternatives to hotspots per se. Uh, I know that people use motion sensors and Arduinos, uh, and actually use that to trigger out HTTP commands. So you can do a lot of interesting things, using different outside tech that could integrate that in. So if you are on a system that has a smaller number of inputs, definitely that would be something to consider. The other thing is everything we did here. I mean, the hotspots were really just an impetus for it, but you could have done that with buttons as well. So if you wanted to, uh, so no, I have not. I haven't figured out a workaround for a smaller number of a smaller number of inputs, uh, but uh, one of the other things is that on even the lower end TriCast, if you've gone to Advanced Edition, you now actually have 8 inputs. So that should work on the Mini. It should work on the 460. So, Stephen, if you have access to like Advanced Edition 2, I think that ups everything. So you double the number of your inputs. So definitely something you could do there. But again, there are so many different ways to trigger things with the TriCaster. So I'll give you another example. I mean, if you were sort of brainstorming here and you needed to do something with that, MIDI is another way. You could actually have a MIDI or just a button push. You could have a button down, button up. And both of those come as two separate signals to the TriCaster, comes as two separate signals to vMix. So if you actually just built a platform with a button under it, so when you put something on it, the button got pressed, and when you took it off, the button released, you'd get that type of signaling as well. So there could be ways to do this without using an input, just using some sort of physical device uh, to to handle this. So yeah, I think getting this working We didn't try it with pure NDI, but I think getting this thing to work with NDI and with you know NDIHS especially would be a big boon because we're using. I mean the PTZ Optics box cams are perfect for this. They're small, relatively low cost, very good quality, so they key well. They can zoom in or zoom fairly wide. Uh, so, lots of different things, you could do with that if they were ND-IHX compatible, because that's just a single cable. Otherwise, you got to sort of run the cable and run an SDI cable and manage it that way. But one of the other things, and we didn't really go into that during the show, was that hotspots on the TriCaster actually will, you can have multiple hotspots in a single view. And so their common example is they do something where somebody will touch up here and then move here and then move low, and they're touching three different hotspots that are all set up behind, on a green screen behind them. So you can have multiple triggers on a single camera view. So if you think of putting a camera up high, like if you want to do something on a stage, putting a camera up high or far away and point it to markers on a floor, you could have a very wide angle. And as long as you could get enough of a chroma key out from the areas that you wanted to make into hotspots, on one camera, you could actually have multiple on and off triggers for each of those hotspots. So that will give you, even if if you only have a limited number of inputs, that would give you a way to certainly work with these types of limited cameras, just one camera and do everything in there. Yeah, Stephen, is talking about putting this in something like this in Wirecast. I think if this could be set up so you could use USB webcams for the hotspot cameras, that would be incredible. I mean, really low cost. They're very high quality today. Something that most people, have access to. And beyond all of that, they're such wide angle that you could do multiple hotspots or cover a broad area without any special gear. You don't need special lenses or anything. So you end up with like the C920 to 925, or they keep changing the 920 line to be all different bits, but they're naturally very wide. They have, like 140-degree field of view or something. So you can cover a lot of space and do multiple triggers with a single webcam. So definitely could be interesting, if we could get something like that to happen. But yeah, I agree. These types of automated triggers can become really, really valuable. Uh, another thing that, I was thinking of is there used to be, I forget exactly what it was called. There was a device for the Xbox which allowed you to play games just using motion. So those types of things would be perfect because they had a lot of smarts built into them, much more than you actually have right now with hotspots, where it can detect if something came in or out of a space. So they might have been called like the Kinects, Xbox Connect or something like that. This would be able to recognize if I walked off the left side or I walked off the right side or if I backed away. So these types of motions could all be detected by this. So it was one of these things where if we could think, and this is new show idea as we're sitting here, that would be something that would be really interesting. If we could actually figure out a way to trigger macros with different types of feedback from a device like that, that could give you Connect. Yes, that was it. Stephen, thank you. It is the Xbox Connect. That would give you an incredible amount of control if you were just the on-screen talent by yourself. Uh, so, thinking about how if I walk to the left side of the stage, I could switch cameras and have a camera that would cover that. And when I move back to the center, it could do that. All these types of things, and it could be very smart about it because it would just basically be able to say, I know where he is, so go now in the center. Or when I go closer or further, any of those types of things. So definitely really cool stuff that you could do with these types of visual automation and AI around visual, around video and photos and other things is becoming really, really powerful. So I expect that we're going to have a lot more and more things that don't necessarily depend on having anything to do with, you know, low end macros or those types of things. Really, really smart. We won't need green screens. It will be able to recognize that where the person moving and track our movements to do things. So yeah, I think churches is an area, and that's one of the reasons we're actually looking at Pro Presenter on next week's show. I think that what we're doing, around automation is a big play for a lot of the worship space, and it's two things. First, the value of the outreach of worship-based streams, I think, is undeniable. It's a way to invite people into a church community, uh, to reach people that can't be at a service, a local service for a particular uh, Sunday. Up, Scott, welcome. Thanks for joining us. Uh, and so not only is the value very high there, but you're also dealing with volunteer crews. A lot of them are not technical production folks. So giving them the ability to put out a higher quality product, visual product, without having to have a lot of error prone repetitive manual mistakes, or to force them to learn a lot of new things. Those types of things could become really, really powerful. And the worship space is perfect for that. Yeah, Scott. I mean, I would guess, i the more that people work with automation and see what it can do, uh, it raises the bar on what you can deliver production wise. But it also reduces errors, and that's something I think when we first talked about automation in one of the early shows here, that was something we pointed out. It's just there are a lot of steps that are often repetitive that happen during a production. And if you can automate a lot of that, you take a lot of the error opportunities out of running a production. And live comes down to simplify the workflow, simplify the demands on an operator, simplify the setup and everything that you're going to need to work with. So, that simplification is just automation is the key to making a lot of that happen. So definitely something that we could, it's something I want to cover more of in the future, different ways to do automation. And I know I've talked about it a lot in the shows, but that's one of the other reasons I'm so interested in the data side of things. Really want to get into how you can leverage automation with data to streamline the workflow for a lot of productions, from sports to worship to conferences and events, which are probably the three biggest ones that. So, oh, Josh just said the hotspots appear to work with the Bird Dog P200. So that's great. I'm jealous. The P200 with the Sony image sensor is a very, very sweet looking camera there. So definitely that's something we'd love at some point to bring into the studio here. But that's great. So the fact is it does work with NDI. So I somebody from New Tech correct me that it's not like true NDI or full NDI. They're all true NDI. There's HX and NDI. So high bandwidth NDI. But yeah, so that's great. That's good to know. So if you're using things like Connect Sparks, which we use here, or any of the bird door gear or the Matrox, which is the other big one in the space, that will give you the ability to you know to work with full NDI off of traditional SDI cameras and bring other things in that way. So thank you, Josh. That's a good piece of information to add to the show here. So, is there anything else anybody'd like to talk about here? So it's funny. One of the things we said, when we had our team meeting earlier this week about the show, One of the suggestions was made was to actually try to find interesting news in the production space. So when we talk about things in the after show, this could be a good time to bring up stuff that maybe people hadn't caught on to yet or hadn't seen, but could impact. So it's something we'll look at doing. So Stephen, you use the Connect Spark. So yeah, the Connects. So there's two Connects. The Connect Spark that had an SDI and an HDMI, and then there's the Connect Spark Pro, which is a 4K unit, and that is full NDI. The Connect Sparks with the SDI and the HDMI were NDI HX, and now they have there's a Connect Spark Plus, I think, is the other one, which is 4K 30, and the Pro is 4K 60, but that's also full high bandwidth NDI. So that's something that keep in mind. So if you're using the other one, that's something to think about. Yeah. So NDI-HX is H264, but the interesting thing is you can still chroma key it. It isn't as good, and it isn't. I wouldn't certainly recommend using NDI-HX over straight NDI for chroma key work. But I'm interested. It may be a legacy thing. It may be something where when they did it initially, uh, they depended more on that. So that could be certainly be something that could be changed in the future. But definitely interested. Yeah. So Stephen, it's you know it is one of those things that you have to deal with the HDMI. The original. Uh, uh, Connect boxes. So they were in the IHX. So we actually have one of those that we use for computers, or if we need to hook up a floating camera really quickly, because that also works with wireless. But that's actually becoming less of a requirement now, because the new NDI HX phone app that NewTek has is incredibly good, and works in 4K too. So we know that NDI HX2, which is another flavor of this that comes up, uh, actually will probably work well with all these things as well. NDI HX2 is very much built around the same tech that NDI itself is built around, the full bandwidth NDI, just with more latency, higher compression, but still the same basic tech. Whereas the original NDI HX, not HX2, was built around things, as just mentioned, like H.264. So uh, definitely, definitely a lot of options here. But my big bet is going to be on AI doing this stuff, and it may be totally new types of boxes uh, that you'll come up and add to your production. And while I think it's one of those things that tear people. It's like in one case, I'd love to have just one box that did everything, but you end up running into limitations with that all the time. So one of the things I love the virtual sets on the TriCaster, but there's a lot more depth I'd like to see them add to that. So things where, it could work with sensors that would know how far forward or backward you was, so you could walk around virtual items, things like that. But you're working inside a TriCaster. So I kind of look at that and say there are limitations to how much processing they can apply to a virtual set, while at the same time letting you run a production. Whereas if they took that same tech and brought it outside in a separate platform, you could scale that up, make it a huge box for whatever you needed. And because of NDI, you could glue all this together. So I think with NDI, beyond sort of everything we talked about with hotspots, NDI acting as this glue will let us do these types of things where maybe I'll have 2 or 3 boxes that I'll take with me, but each one I can power up and do all different things with. And it will stitch together. So in one interface, I'll see it as basically one control interface, even though it's all linked together through NDI, and sort of controlled through IP-based automation. So could be some interesting things for how this all plays out. But things like AI in in visual decomposition, looking at an image or a video and recognizing things that are going on, identifying faces or speakers and other things. That stuff is all coming. So can't wait to see how this all plays out. It's pretty exciting. So uh, if there aren't any more questions or things people would like to talk about, I want to say thanks to everybody. This was, like I said, this was a fun show, and it was great because we have a lot of engagement in the after show, and I really enjoy this. This makes it all the better. So, all right then, until next week when we talk about Pro Presenter 7. Have a great week, everyone, and I'll see you. Take care.